What if the most dangerous idea inside your mind was never yours to begin with? Not a command, not a hypnotic suggestion, not something forced into your consciousness. An idea so carefully planted that, by the time you notice it, you already believe you created it yourself. That is the psychological weapon hidden inside Inception. When Christopher Nolan released the film in 2010, audiences saw an impossible heist unfolding through collapsing cities, shared dreams, rotating corridors, and multiple layers of reality. But beneath the spectacle was something far more disturbing, a story about penetrating the human mind without leaving evidence behind. And the deeper we investigate the production of Inception, the stranger the file becomes. Because Nolan had been carrying the central concept for years before cameras ever rolled, he was fascinated by dreams, memory, perception, and the terrifying instability of subjective reality. But somewhere during the long development of the project, the dream itself became something else. A weapon. Not designed to steal information. Designed to manufacture belief. This is where our investigation begins. Inside this file are years of development, unusual filmmaking decisions, practical illusions constructed to destabilize perception, psychological concepts embedded inside the screenplay, and one central question that becomes increasingly uncomfortable the longer you remain inside the archive. How do you know when an idea truly belongs to you? Because Inception understood something that extends far beyond dreams. Human beings do not experience reality directly. We construct it. Memory fills the gaps. Emotion changes interpretation. Repetition creates familiarity. Suggestion can influence what we notice, what we fear, and sometimes even what we believe. And if someone understood that architecture well enough, perhaps they wouldn't need to control your behavior. They would only need to control the conditions in which your thoughts are born. Tonight, we are not simply revisiting Inception. We are opening its psychological file. And before we can understand the weapon hidden inside the film, we need to discover where Christopher Nolan found the idea that started everything. Because every Inception has an origin. And this one existed long before the dream began. But before we go deeper into this file, I want you to think about something. Have you ever caught yourself believing something strongly, only to realize later that you couldn't remember exactly where that belief came from? Maybe it began with a conversation, a headline, a video, an image repeated enough times that it slowly became familiar. Or perhaps the origin disappeared completely, leaving only the idea behind. If you've ever experienced something like that, tell me in the comments. Where do you think our ideas truly begin, and how much of what we believe is actually our own? That question matters here, because Shadow Reel isn't just about watching disturbing films. It's about investigating what they reveal about us, about perception, psychological manipulation, hidden influence, and the mechanisms operating beneath the surface of everyday reality. So if you value investigations like this, leave a like on the video. It helps these files reach other viewers willing to look beyond the screen and follow the evidence deeper. And if this is the kind of cinema you want to investigate, subscribe to Shadow Reel and join us inside the archive. There are more psychological files waiting to be opened. But right now, we have only one. Inception. And to understand how a film about stealing dreams became an investigation into the architecture of human belief, we have to return to the moment before the first layer was ever constructed. Before the spinning top. Before the dream machine. Before anyone attempted to plant an idea. We have to find the origin. Open file 003. To find the origin of Inception, we have to go back years before anyone stepped onto a film set. Christopher Nolan had been fascinated by dreams since he was young, especially by the unsettling realization that while dreaming, we often accept impossible events without questioning them. By the early 2000s, he had already begun developing a story built around dream thieves, but the project wasn't ready. Something was missing. Nolan eventually realized that the real psychological weapon wasn't extraction, stealing an idea from someone's mind. It was the opposite. Planting one. After the success of The Dark Knight in 2008, Warner Bros. Gave Nolan the scale necessary to finally construct that world. Leonardo DiCaprio became Dom Cobb, a professional extractor haunted by the memory of his wife Mal, played by Marion Cotillard. Joseph Gordon-Levitt joined as Arthur, Ellen Page, now Elliot Page, as Ariadne, Tom Hardy as Eames, Ken Watanabe as Saito, and Cillian Murphy as Robert Fisher. the target of the impossible operation. But Nolan wanted the dream to feel disturbingly physical. Principal photography began in June 2009, and the production moved through multiple countries, including Japan, the United Kingdom, France, Morocco, Canada, and the United States. Paris became the stage for one of the film's most recognizable moments, when the city appears to fold over itself. Tangier, Morocco, became the chaotic streets of Mombasa. Calgary, Alberta, provided the frozen landscape for the mountain fortress. And then came one of the strangest pieces of evidence in the entire production. For the famous rotating hallway sequence, Nolan's team didn't simply simulate the environment digitally. Production designer Guy Hendricks Dias and the crew constructed an enormous corridor capable of physically rotating, while Joseph Gordon-Levitt performed inside it. Gravity itself seemed to disappear because, from the camera's perspective, the world was actually moving. That decision reveals something important about Nolan's method. The audience needed to distrust reality while still believing what it saw. When Inception premiered in London on July 8, 2010, before its wider theatrical release later that month, audiences entered expecting a science fiction thriller. What they encountered was a psychological labyrinth about dreams, memory, guilt, perception, and manipulation. But buried underneath those layers was the darker mechanism we came here to investigate. Because Cobb's team isn't ultimately trying to control Robert Fisher. They want Fisher to control himself. They construct the environment, they manipulate emotion, they guide memory. Then they disappear, leaving the target convinced that the final decision belongs entirely to him. And that changes the nature of this file. If you understand what that means, leave one word below. Planted. Because now we're ready to examine the weapon itself. And this is where Inception becomes more than a dream heist. Because the operation targeting Robert Fisher is built around a disturbing psychological principle. If you want an idea to survive inside someone, you cannot simply tell them what to think. The target must experience the idea emotionally, connect it to something deeply personal, and eventually recognize it as his own. Cobb understands this because he has already performed Inception once. On Mal. While trapped together in limbo, Cobb planted the idea that their world wasn't real. It worked. The thought grew until Mal accepted it completely. But when they returned to reality, the idea survived. What had been designed as a way out became a psychological infection. Mal could no longer trust the world around her. That is the warning hidden inside Christopher Nolan's screenplay. An idea doesn't need to remain connected to its creator. Once accepted, it can begin reproducing itself. And notice how Cobb's team approaches Fisher, played by Cillian Murphy. They don't simply enter his subconscious and announce, "Break up your father's empire." That would feel foreign. It would trigger resistance. Instead, they construct an elaborate emotional journey around Fisher's relationship with his dying father, Maurice, played by Pete Postlethwaite. The manipulation works because it feels intimate. Arthur manages the architecture. Eames impersonates people Fisher trusts. Ariadne designs the dream spaces. Yusuf controls the chemical conditions. Saito provides the objective. Cobb understands the psychology. Together, they don't manufacture a command. They manufacture an experience. And this is what makes idea implantation such a powerful psychological weapon within the world of Inception. The target participates in his own manipulation. Every layer pushes Fisher toward an emotional conclusion that appears to emerge naturally from unresolved pain, memory, and desire. The deeper they descend, the less visible the manipulation becomes. Think about that. The perfect psychological operation would not feel like coercion. It would feel like discovery. You wouldn't say, "Someone changed my mind." You would say, "I finally realized something." And suddenly the entire movie becomes more disturbing because the dream machine is almost secondary. The real technology is understanding what human beings protect, what they fear, what they need to believe, and which emotional doors they will open themselves. That is why Inception belongs inside the Shadow Archives. Not because it proves that ideas can literally be planted through shared dreams, but because it asks what happens when influence becomes invisible. When the architect disappears, when the manipulation leaves no fingerprints, and when the thought remains. If this part of the file changed the way you see the operation, leave one symbolic word below. Inception. Because the next question is the one the film never fully answers. What happens when this psychological weapon escapes the dream? And this is where we have to separate science fiction from something much closer to us. There is no evidence that governments, corporations, or intelligence agencies possess a machine capable of entering shared dreams and implanting thoughts the way Cobb's team does in Inception. But remove the dream technology from Nolan's story, and something uncomfortable remains. The architecture of influence. Advertising has always tried to associate products with emotion. Propaganda has always attempted to shape perception. Political campaigns test messages. Social platforms measure attention. Recommendation systems learn what keeps people watching, clicking, and returning. None of this is literal inception, but all of it exists inside the same battlefield the film asks us to examine: the human mind. And since Inception reached theaters in July 2010, that battlefield has become increasingly personalized. Today, two people can open the same platform and encounter completely different realities. Algorithms can recommend content based on previous behavior, creating information environments shaped around individual interests and patterns of engagement. Repetition can make certain messages feel familiar. Emotion can make information more memorable. Social proof can influence what appears credible. And the most effective influence doesn't always announce itself as influence. That is where Nolan's psychological weapon becomes such a powerful metaphor. Remember Robert Fisher. Cobb's team doesn't force him to dismantle his father's empire. They build an environment in which that decision feels emotionally authentic. Fisher walks through the maze himself. Now look at the world outside the screen. Every day, we move through architectures designed by someone else. Feeds, advertisements, notifications, recommendations, headlines, search results. Most are not secret psychological operations, but they still compete for one of the most valuable resources on Earth: your attention. And attention is the doorway through which ideas enter. Perhaps that is why Inception, directed by Christopher Nolan and led by Leonardo DiCaprio, still feels strangely relevant more than 16 years after its 2010 release. Beneath the rotating corridors and collapsing dream cities, the film leaves us with a question technology cannot answer for us. Where did this thought come from? Maybe freedom of thought isn't about living without influence. That may be impossible. Maybe it begins with recognizing the architecture around us. Asking who built it. Asking why. And occasionally stopping long enough to examine an idea before calling it our own. So before we close File 003, leave one final phrase in the archive. Question the origin. Because somewhere inside the shadow archives, another psychological weapon is already waiting to be examined. Another film. Another experiment. Another file. File 003, Inception. Investigation complete. But the archive never closes.